Some experts worry that the economy needs more inflation. Subtitle, some warn that the Fed could lose control of prices as the economy recovers. Now, whoever gave the government the right to control prices? The Constitution doesn't give that right to government, nor does it give the right to government to pass off that so-called responsibility to a private bank, which is the Federal Reserve. They're worried about losing control over prices. It's none of their business. Prices are between the consumer and the supplier in a free enterprise situation. The caption showing Ben Bernanke sitting at his desk, Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, some of whose officials cite the lower pace of inflation as a reason to continue the stimulus. Now, I don't know if you've read a dictionary lately or not relative to what inflation is, but this is a dictionary from the 1930s. And the definition of inflation there reads this way. Inflation, 1, swelling with air, gas, pride, etc. Sounds like a politician, but at any rate, the second one is a swollen state, too great an expansion. And finally, this is very interesting, the third definition is the increase of the currency of a country by issuing too much paper money. Now, the reason I say this is interesting is this is the third definition. You go to dictionaries today, what's the first definition? It's the one concerning prices, money, etc. In fact, the first edition, the first American edition of the American Dictionary didn't even have the word inflation in it from the standpoint of talking about money and balloons or anything else, because inflation wasn't a situation in those days either monetarily or on the natural course of things. Now, that's the 1930s. Okay, this is the dictionary I used when I went to school, and this is from, well, I won't tell you. And this is what the definition is. 1, undue expansion or increase of the currency of a country, especially by issuing of paper money not redeemable in specie. In other words, you can't take that paper to the bank or wherever and redeem it in gold and silver. So let me read that again in that light. 1, undue expansion or increase of the currency of a country, especially by issuing of paper money not redeemable in specie. 2, a substantial rise of prices caused by an undue expansion of paper money or bank credit. Now, and then 3 and 4 are blowing up a balloon kind of inflation. So you see, in that interim of 40 years, the whole definition of inflation has changed from being something that's inflated from air to the process of inflating paper currency. Now, in some dictionaries today, they will give you the correct but also the incorrect definition of inflation. Often the first one is the incorrect one, which is the rise of prices and wages in the economy. That's not inflation at all. That is the net effect. That is the result of issuing too much paper money. It is an invisible form of taxation, because when the government issues all of this paper money and or credit through the Fed, then you see what happens is that it inflates the number of paper dollars or credit out in the marketplace. That process means that the prices go up, because let's say if you have a plate and that plate is $1, let's say. Now, if you put out twice as many pieces of paper in the money supply and you don't increase the number of plates, then that plate becomes worth $2 in the normal course of events. Now, the people who are closest to the government benefit from these things, but particularly the government itself, because the government, through the Fed, will issue this new money and have the full benefit of its worth in relationship to all the other money that's out there. But as that filters through the economy, usually takes 18 months, 2 years, then that will cause a rise in prices because there's more money in circulation. It's the way it works. It is so subtle, most people don't see the process or understand the process or the fact that they are actually taxing the people in the course of events, because they are issuing all this money and all this credit and getting the benefit of it, but stealing from the population at the same time. During the Civil War, this happened with the greenbacks in the Union and the Confederate dollars in the Confederate States. The Union started out with $1 equaling $1. By the end of the war, it was worth 50 cents. And so that meant that the Union stole from its citizens the value of everything in the Union by half. In the Confederacy, it was worse. They actually stole nearly 100% of the net worth of everything in the Confederacy. In the Confederate States had a gold confiscation. The North didn't, by the way. That was the reason the South could not recover, was the tremendous amount of worth that was sucked out of the economy through this paper money by the Confederacy. Yes, it was worthless at the end of the war, but it was worthless anyway. The Confederacy could have won the war, and it was still only worth a penny on the dollar at the end of the war, then worthless after Appomattox. But let me read you a couple of other things in this article. One thing, it says, the Fed has worked for decades to suppress inflation, but economists, including Janet Yellen, President Obama's nominee to lead the Fed starting next year, have long argued that a little inflation is particularly valuable when the economy is weak. By the way, Mrs. Yellen is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. That should not come as any surprise. Critics, including Professor Rogoff, say the Fed is being too weak. He says that inflation should be pushed as high as 6% a year for a few years, a rate not seen since the early 1980s. That's when it got up to not just 6%, but as much as 20%. Everybody says that inflation is low, but if you look at the figures, it doesn't quite come out that way. Now, 6% is being advocated. The claim is that it's less than 2%. Well, under these years of 2 to 3%, we have seen 70% inflation and more in 10 years, and it would be 70% if it was 6%. Milk, for instance, in 2003 to 2013 has gone up 136%. Bread has gone up 36%. Gas has gone up 227%. And gold has gone up 385%. Now, this is in 10 years when everybody was saying the inflation is low. You can imagine if they increase inflation by 2, 3, 4% of times, rather, what they have right now or claim to have, which is, by the way, a lie. It's a lot higher than the official government figures because they're pulling things out of the statistics that they don't want to judge inflation with because they're going way high. You can imagine if they judged it based on gold, inflation would be astronomical, or gas or whatever. And by the way, with gas, 227% in 10 years is in the face of a glut, if you will, of gasoline and exploration and everything else that's come along. So you can imagine that we could have a tremendous amount, maybe 200 to 300% inflation over the next 10 years if we go to an official 6% figure. The unofficial 1 to 2%, we've had the figures that I gave you. And so this is a problem. With inflation, people don't understand what it is. And so they listen and read, are extolled to promote things like more inflation from the Fed. It's very harmful to the economy. It will ruin our economy. It already is. We have a glut of paper and credit hitting the banks. It takes a little while for that to permeate down. We're starting to see the results of that across the board. If they start doing it more and more, and that's really what it means. By advocating more inflation, what they really mean is we want to print more money. And it'll make what you have in your pocket, in your savings account, in your investments, worth less over a period of time due to inflation. Until next week, we'll see you then.